For the past couple of decades, we've been living through a superhero movie renaissance. These movies are consistently getting 3 to 4 sequels, some making over $1 billion, and drawing in hundreds of millions of people into theaters. But they're all quite different, with different tones, directors, and characters, their only similarity being their main selling point, a superhero movie based on a beloved comic. They've changed drastically throughout the years. The campy Christopher Reeves Superman and Adam West Batman movies led into the dark Nolan Batman and grounded Iron Man movies.
He says, I just wish you could all see the Earth the way that I see it. Because when you really look at it, it's just one world.
The truth is that the technology and the mythology of a character like Iron Man is actually pretty close at hand. So I think that that just brings a real interesting realism to it.
The superhero genre is so vast that there's a million reasons how people turn into superheroes. Getting bitten, falling into vats, gaining some alien technology. But there's one method that I've seen so many times that it made me realize an interesting common thread in the themes of their stories. Gamma radiation.
Although many miles from Bomb Zero, Dr. Bruce Banner is bathed in the full force of the mysterious gamma rays.
I think the overuse of gamma radiation in explaining superpowers just surprised me because of how random it is. Obviously, falling into a vat of eels is a more random-sounding method, but to me, the super weird methods actually seem more normal, because abnormality is the norm in the superhero genre. All these stories exist without limits, so the creator can make the characters' origins as weird and unexplainable as they want.
I had the Hulk created by a gamma bomb. I don't know what a gamma bomb, I don't know what gamma rays are, but it sounded good.
But gamma radiation is real, which in this genre makes it stand out. Gamma radiation is a form of electromagnetic radiation. It's produced by nuclear reactions, can go through almost anything, and has the power to remove electrons from atoms, making it incredibly dangerous. Gamma radiation was discovered in 1900 by Paul Villard, a French chemist that was studying the element radium. 3 years later, the radiation was named gamma rays, because the other two types of decay radiation were already named alpha and beta rays. Research on gamma rays ended up evolving to serve practical applications. Gamma radiation was used to sterilize medical equipment and treat some cancers, but they were found to be able to cause DNA mutations, cancer, radiation sickness, hair loss, hemorrhaging. While all these sound horrible to the average person, to a comic book writer, they sound like a jumping-off point for a good story. It's difficult to know the true origin of the radiation-powered superhero. The Invisible Man, H.G. Wells' 1897 novel, describes ethereal vibrations, which is thought to be a 19th century term for radiation. This term is used to describe how the protagonist, Griffin, gained his invisibility powers from exposure to radiation. In the book, he's a medical student experimenting in a lab when he finds a way to turn himself invisible. But this novel came out before gamma rays were officially discovered, and Griffin is far from a hero. He's actually kind of an asshole. His father commits suicide after he robs him, and Griffin is completely indifferent. He experiments on a cat, and he murders a neighbor in a fit of rage simply because he's there. So we're pretty far from the morally adequate superhero transformed by gamma radiation.
I shall offer my secret to the world, with all its terrible power. The nations of the world will bid for it, thousands, millions. The nation that wins my secret can sweep the world with invisible armies.
About 30 years later, we get Buck Rogers. In 1929, the world is introduced to Buck, an engineer for the American Radioactive Gas Corporation. He's working a job surveying an abandoned mine with a peculiar pungent tang with crumbling rock that glowed strangely. He gets caved in, falls into a coma, and wakes up in the year 2429. So this strange, possibly radioactive gas preserved him in a coma for 500 years, but it didn't necessarily give him superpowers.
I think people will identify with me as well as Buck Rogers.
I think the first widespread example of the superhero we think of is with 1945's Atomic Man. In this comic, Dr. Adam Mann gets his powers after being exposed to a nuclear explosion while conducting an experiment with uranium-235. He's immune to radiation, fire, bullets, he's super strong, he can fly. He makes it out of his radiation poisoning pretty well. 5 years later, in 1950, we get Captain Atom, who gained his gamma radiation and subsequent powers through a government experiment that ended in a nuclear explosion. Then, about a decade later, we get the motherlode of gamma-radiated characters from the 1962 introduction of the Incredible Hulk. In the comics, Banner was running tests in a lab for a gamma-run nuclear weapon. It obviously ended up going awry because all science experiments in comics do, and he jumped in front of the explosion to save a student, absorbing all the radiation into his body and turning him into the Hulk. Hulk exists as a sort of Jekyll and Hyde werewolf character, a person that remains rational and human for part of their life, but regularly transforms into a monster that they can't control for the other half.
I had always loved the story Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and also I loved Frankenstein. Now, to me, the monster in Frankenstein was really the hero. You know, he was nice. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He went around patting little kids on the head, and these idiots with clubs and torches used to chase him around the countryside. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a monster who was really the good guy, you see, and let him change, like in Jekyll and Hyde, back to a normal person?
His character opens the door for so many gamma-radiated superheroes and villains. In 1967, Emil Blonsky, the Abomination, intentionally exposes himself to gamma. In 1980, She-Hulk has a blood transfusion from Bruce that's littered with gamma radiation. Scar inherited gamma powers from his father. Doc Samson used gamma to treat himself. Thaddeus Ross, the Red Hulk, worked with MODOK to bring Betty Ross back to life. MODOK transferred radiation from the Hulk and used it to transform Ross. The leader, Samuel Stearns, made his first appearance in 1964. He was transporting radioactive materials when an explosion occurred that filled him with gamma radiation. This turned his skin green, enlarged his brain, and caused his hair to fall out. The first and last of those could be related to real effects from radiation poisoning. Radiation poisoning can cause skin color changes. People have pointed out that Mr. Bobinski, the ringmaster from Coraline whose skin is tinted blue, wears a medal awarded to the Chernobyl cleanup crew. Stearns also had his hair fall out, an early symptom of radiation poisoning. In the 2008 movie, he used gamma radiation to turn Emil Blonsky into the Abomination. Both Ross and Stearns were seen as recently as this year, with their characters in Captain America: Brave New World, small spoiler for that movie, taking pills with gamma radiation in them and explaining that their transformation was sparked by exposure to gamma radiation. Hulk stories really are a goldmine for radiation. And I have to mention this one because I think it was my first introduction to this trope. 2006's cult classic family comedy, Zoom: Academy for Superheroes, which is sitting at an impressive 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. The whole premise of this movie is that Jack Shephard, Zoom, was part of an elite team of superheroes, Team Zenith. They were employed by the government to fight crime or something, and the government decided to dose them with Gamma-13 to enhance their powers.
The government sought to enhance the team's powers using Gamma-13 radiation.
Zoom got stronger and faster, but his brother Concussion inexplicably turned evil, and it's implied that he murdered the rest of their teammates. In this story, I always assumed that the movie was suggesting that the gamma radiation increases the good or evil in a person. Since Jack was net good, the gamma made him better, and since Connor was net bad, the gamma made him worse. The government tries to do the same thing with Zoom's new team, so he breaks them out of the facility, and they leave to fight Concussion themselves. They defeat him with the power of love, and this vortex that chokes him pulls the radiation out. So the examples are down, now the reasoning.
Most of all, most important, you're going to need massive doses of Gamma-13 emissions. So let's wheel in that big machine and zap the little guys, huh?
Like many other ones, this superhero origin is tied to historical events.
No matter what the problem was in society at the time, it sort of would show itself in our books.
What is drawn today will become very important. It's the hieroglyphs of or the graffiti of our times.
Stories related to gamma radiation start to pop up in comics in the 1940s. The Atomic Man was introduced the same year as the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Characters like Godzilla were presented as this what-if for the effects of radiation poisoning. What if radiation could lead to something like this? What would that look like in our world? After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the possibility of nuclear war was on the forefront of everyone's minds, leading to the development of characters like Captain Atom, whose backstories were rooted in government experiments and nuclear disasters.
All in all, our reflection of the times we live in, especially then the reflected fears, social economics, wars, and so on.
As the late 50s and early 60s rolled around, another event was in full speed. The space race.
Another spectacular year in the space race.
The space race got audiences obsessed with the cosmos and space-age technology. In 1961, the first Fantastic Four comic was released, featuring a family of astronauts that got their powers from cosmic radiation while on a flight in space. Oftentimes, these heroic stories were a response to a fear, specifically addressing what if this negative was a positive. In the early 60s, astronauts being exposed to radiation was a real fear. Part of the popularity of these comics came from the fact that they were bringing joy and wonder back into these cosmic questions. What if the astronauts went up to space, and they did get exposed to radiation, but instead of getting radiation poisoning and dying, they gained superpowers, and used them for good to protect the people of Earth? That's a much more uplifting story, and a much needed one in a time where people were surrounded by so much chaos and fear in need of forms of escapism. Although it does serve as a form of escapism, these comic books and superhero movies can still feature darker tones and moral questions. And with gamma radiation, I think its usage in media comes down to three qualities. It's instant, unwanted, and unexplainable. Gamma radiation represents an instant transformation that doesn't need to be explained because it's rooted in reality. Some superheroes get powers through work. Iron Man builds his costume, Bruce Wayne trains for years before becoming a vigilante, but the majority of superheroes get powers instantly. They fall into a vat or take a serum or get cosmic accessories. But with things like the super soldier serum, Cap gets immediately transformed. But even with that, we don't know what the serum is, and there's nothing in our world similar to it. But with origin stories like the spider bite, I think they stick more with audiences, especially younger audiences, because they're somewhat rooted in reality. Spiders that bite people and give them extreme reactions exist. Real experiments using animal DNA for human application exist. And radiation poisoning exists. Peter gets bit by a radioactive spider, Bruce gets exposed to gamma radiation, Daredevil is blinded by radioactive waste. When this instant change occurs, we can get right into the effects. Gamma blast happens, and within a very short window, the character begins to notice its effects. So that's number one. It's instant, which makes it a straight-to-the-point story mechanic. The second quality of gamma is that it's unexplainable.
What are gamma rays?
The unexplainable nature makes it a blank slate. You can do whatever you want with gamma. It can make you strong, invisible, evil, whatever your story calls for. This gives these stories strong potential as a visual medium as well. Gamma radiation is flexible. None of the children reading the comics probably understand what it is, since it's invisible, so it leaves a door open to a ton of possibilities for effects. Because the audience doesn't understand it, they don't understand its effects. So when a character gets hit by a ton of gamma radiation, you're intrigued to see the physical toll it takes on the character. The Zenith team doesn't change at all physically. The leader gets a big head and loses his hair, and the Hulk grows and turns green, but is able to revert back to his normal body. Some transformations are pretty one-to-one. Electro gets electrocuted and gets electric powers. But with Gamma, sometimes it can give you intelligence, then other times it can give you strength, and other times speed. It's easier to suspend your disbelief on the power set it creates if the vehicle for the powers is a one-size-fits-all plot device. It's unpredictable, and unpredictability is entertaining. So these first two qualities have related to the audience consuming these stories. Instant transformations are dramatic and to the point, and unexplainable cosmic events are flexible and mysterious. But the last quality relates almost completely to the character. Gamma radiation is unwanted. The heroes that have gained power through gamma radiation were forced, and the villains that did so intentionally. For the heroes, it represents a lack of agency. They didn't want to get hit with a radiation blast, but they did, and now they're dealing with the consequences. Bruce doesn't want to turn into the Hulk, but he has no choice in the matter, and once he's Hulk, he basically turns into another person. It presents the question of whether or not he should be held morally accountable for things the Hulk did, even though he has no control over them.
Maniac wiped out the whole team?
It really wasn't his fault. I mean, they made him into that.
Like I said earlier, gamma-radiated characters are a sort of play on transformation. Werewolves are prisoners to the full moon, Dr. Jekyll is a prisoner to Mr. Hyde, Banner is a prisoner to Hulk. Nearly every X-Men story explores the idea of forced evolution. They have no control over the mutations in their DNA, or the changes that surround them. Angel has a gruesome scene where he cuts his wings off, a futile attempt to prevent his evolution. The Sentinels are a physical embodiment of evolving Mystique's DNA to create weapons of war, and Wolverine's skeleton and claws were improved through forced experimentation. This lack of agency, like the gamma ray situation, both serve as a warning against technology. It relates to the larger question. Just because humans can advance technology, should they? The atomic bomb can be created, but should it? These stories explore how the decisions of others can force consequences on regular people. These stories are meant to be idealized fantasies, wishful thinking. But Gamma mixes it up a little. What if you were struck with a gamma blast, which would kill any normal person, but you survived it? But after you survived it, you had to deal with a new appearance, a new power set, new anger issues. It presents a complicated story. In exploring these stories, we get to see how characters are positively or negatively transformed by their lack of agency in this instant, unexplainable accident. Hulk and Abomination are both exposed to gamma radiation, but where Hulk remains stoic, goes to therapy, and reveals Professor Hulk, Abomination simmers in his resentment towards Hulk and his desire for power, allowing the gamma to consume him. Gamma is an intentionally unexplained medium to suspend one's disbelief in a story about instant transformation and moral ambiguity. Its popularity grew after public fixation with a devastating event that ended the positive perception on technological advancements. And Gamma in superhero stories became a tipping point. It could represent the end, destruction, a mistake, or it could be a start.